Hello again and welcome. This is As It Is, a daily magazine show from VOA Learning English. In 2016, the world will celebrate the 450th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth. Today, Jim Tedder tells us about the project that hopes to make Shakespeare's poem more interesting for a 21st century audience. But first, we hear about the winner of this year's Nobel Prize in Literature. Canada's Alice Munro wins 2013 Nobel Literature Prize. Canadian writer Alice Munro has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. In announcing its decision, the Swedish Academy called the 82-year-old writer a master of contemporary short story. Munro is the 13th woman to win the Literature Prize. She said she hoped the award would make people see the short story as an important act, not just something you played around with until you get a novel written. Alice Munro began writing in her youth. Her stories began appearing in magazines in the early 1950s. She published her first collection of short stories in 1968, called Dance of Happy Shades and Other Stories. Many of her collections are about small-town farming communities, like her hometown of southwestern Ontario, Canada. Her most recent collection, Dear Life, was published in 2012. It includes 4 short stories that Munro describes as autobiographical in feeling, though not sometimes entirely so, in fact. In her words, they are the closest things I have to say about my own life. Earlier this year, the writer announced that she was probably not going to write anymore. The Canadian writer will receive about $1.2 million for her Nobel Prize award. The award ceremony will be held in Stockholm, Sweden on December 10. The Swedish Academy says Alice Munro has declined an invitation to attend the award ceremony because of poor health. No word on who will represent her at the Nobel Prize award ceremony. Filming Shakespeare's poem for a 21st century audience. Nothing like the Nobel Prize award existing during the time of William Shakespeare. The first Nobel Prize was not awarded in 1901, nearly 300 years after the death of so-called Bird of Avon. Next year makes the 450th anniversary of William Shakespeare's birth. His plays are still widely performed all over the world, but for many people, Shakespeare is something they study in school, not something they read or write for pleasure. One American theater company is trying to change that, Jim Tedder reports. Ross Williams studied acting and directing in school. He launched a theater company called the New York Shakespeare Exchange. Ross Williams loves Shakespeare, but he knows that many people might not share that love. He says 400-year-old English is tough to understand, and he says many people think of Shakespeare as dusty and dull. So I started thinking about how I could deliver Shakespeare to people in small chunks, things that would be manageable and get people to experience Shakespeare in their day-to-day lives without having to make the commitment to go see a full show. And so we started with the sonnets because they're contained. Sonnets are 14-line poems. Ross Williams and his partners launched the Sonnet Project as part of their theater company. The group hopes to film and release each of Shakespeare's 154 sonnets before the great English writer's birthday next April. Each piece is being filmed in a different location in New York City. On this day, a crew is shooting sonnet number 3 in a 150-year-old bar in Brooklyn. In this sonnet, an old man urges a good-looking young man to find someone to have his child. The sonnet ends with the words "die single" and tying images "die with 3." In the film, actor Ron Cohen plays a barman. He is trying to persuade a young customer to check out 2 girls at the end of the bar, lest he miss his chance to reproduce. Cohen has acted in several Shakespeare plays. He likes the idea of presenting Shakespeare in short films. Fantastic, good idea, especially the idea of doing it in different locates in New York, trying in the contemporary feeling of Shakespeare. To complete the project, this requires the talents of many artists. Ross Williams put out a call to filmmakers on the Sonnet Project's website and by word of mouth. 25 years old Noemi Charlotte Thebes was one of many who answered the call. He directed Sonnet 71 a few months ago. Yet he admits he had very little knowledge of Shakespeare when he came to the Sonnet Project. I thought sonnets were like monologues or soliloquies from his plays. I totally had no idea what these were, so I was completely naive and ignorant to the whole thing. What he remembered when he started studying the sonnet was how visual Shakespeare's language is. Thebes compares the playwrights to a famous filmmaker today. When you're talking about what makes his language so unique, he was in a lot of ways like Quentin Tarantino is today. I always say if Shakespeare was an artist living today, he wouldn't be a playwright. He would be a screenwriter. He would be a filmmaker. Ross Williams agrees. He wants people to see Shakespeare as part of pop culture, which he says the playwright was back in his day. It is a little tricky sometimes, but it still works, telling a story and sharing emotion. He says that it is true even when the emotion is coming from a tiny screen on your phone instead of from a stage.